going on, everybody? It's Floowandereeze coming at you with a brand new video, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Seems to be in quite the interesting spot right now, with the Shizu tier still being the clear dominant tier 0 threat that it is, and with the upcoming Naturia cards in Photon Hypernova bringing a brand new infuriating way to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, things don't be looking to get better anytime soon. Adding on to this, the daunting price of both strategies, even before a deck like Naturia receives all of its full support, can be pretty daunting to most players, but I want you all to know that it's not all doom and gloom. There are so many strategies in the game right now that can still keep up with the tier element threat, but can be still built at an affordable price. This video is going to showcase just a few of those strategies in order to maybe introduce you to some strategies you might not have thought about before, and without staples being included, I'm only going to try to include decks that can be built for around under $100. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into my top 5 competitive budget decks for the January 2023 Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. Starting off our list at number 5, we have Sword Soul. Now, Sword Soul has certainly passed its prime as being the winning deck of the United States Nationals back in 2022, and this mainly stems from the fact that the game has significantly sped up since the time where a deck like Sword Soul would have been like super amazing, with a more combo and aggressive focused playstyle, with more varied and huge amounts of disruptions, as opposed to just being in a more mid-range sort of format like Sword Soul was. Because of this, Sword Soul can definitely feel a bit overwhelmed at times, but that's not stopping the deck from snagging a few top cuts here and there, and it's not very hard to see why. Our current format tends to favor board breakers a little bit more than hand traps, at least non-Bistio related hand traps, and Sword Soul is a deck that excels at breaking boards. Cards like Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha and Sword Soul Sovereign Shengying are fantastic at just absolutely shredding through opponents' end boards, even without the reliance of cards like Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched. And Incredible Ecclesia is, dare I say, incredible at letting the deck start its plays off before wasting its valuable normal summon. It's also a deck that's scary good at abusing the time rules, with both the main and extra deck long wand cards allowing you to burn your opponent for a significant amount of damage, which not only does help in time, but also is great for just pushing for game in general. The deck actually used to be quite the pretty penny on release, but with the amazing reprints out of a set like Magnificent Mavens, the deck could not be more affordable right now. Even including the Tenyi and Yang Xing cards for the main and extra deck, an entire Sword Soul core will cost you around roughly $50, and a large chunk of that only falls to Draco Berserker of the Tenyi being $13 on just his own. While Sword Soul is definitely not the most fast-paced deck, and cards like the Bistials and Shizu cards will definitely give you a bit of a run for your money, it's still an amazing budget option for tearing up the metagame right now, and it's only going to get stronger come the release of Photon Hypernova with the release of Ice Jade Adrian Gimir, a powerful new synchro monster that'll really help it play against tier limit. Because of this, Sword Soul is taking the number 5 slot on this list. Next up at number 4, we have Draco Slayer. So admittedly, my knowledge of this deck is a pretty surface level as opposed to some of the other ones on this list, so if I do miss anything really important about it, please let me know in the comments below, because honestly these videos are made so much better by having y'all help me out in the comments. I'm unfortunately just one man and I can't really get everything done on my own, so having us support each other rather than just me spewing information that I barely know what I'm saying about, it's really helpful. But Draco Slayer is a fantastic combo pendulum deck that came out of Darkwing Blast, and admittedly it had a bit of a slow start, but has recently seen a massive rise to success in both regional and YCS level events. Admittedly, I don't know any of the set combos or how many cards are required for them, but the end boards I've seen for this deck are honestly kinda crazy, with a bunch of generic power cards such as Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess, Borreload Savage Dragon, IP Masquerena, etc. Hell, due to the busted searching power of their Majesty Pegasus monster, they can literally search any field spell in the entire game, typically being Necro Valley this format, as it's such a strong card to prevent tier players from even starting their plays to begin with. One of my favorite things that I do know about the deck is that none of their extra deck monsters have hard once per turn effects, meaning that you can abuse the power of World Sea Dragon Zealantis, a Link 4 that you can make using just a single Link 4 that can reset the entire board and allow you to use those effects again. Speaking of, this card is absolutely ridiculous and still only going for around $7.50 a copy, so I've said this before, but I'll say it again, pick up your Zealantises now. Once again, ignoring cards like Baron and Staples, a full Draco Slayer core will only cost you around $40 roughly, and that's including mainly Beyond the Pendulum taking up a good chunk of that as well. I think that Draco Slayer, while it's far from the most amazing Pendulum deck we've ever had, is still such an insanely strong option for a competitive player looking for a complex budget deck. Coming in at number 3, we have a personal favorite on the channel, that being Lyrilusk Tri-Brigade or Bird Up. up. So admittedly, again, this is probably my favorite deck ever, so I am a little bit biased, but I'm not biased when I say that this deck is actually really good right now. You have incredibly consistent 1.5 to 2 card combos that can end you on some massive end boards with anywhere from 8 or more disruptions, or you can sacrifice a few of those disruptions in order to set up powerful floodgates and omni negates with a shit ton of recursion. For example, you can end on end boards with things like Ensemble Robin with anywhere from 3 to 4 materials, Appaloosa with 2 to 3 negates, Ancient Warrior Oath Double Dragon Lords, and of course Utopic Draco Future, which is definitely very weak to something like a Dark Ruler No More, and doesn't admittedly have the best follow-up, but is mainly really good at overwhelming your opponent with the sheer amount of disruptions on your end board and forcing them to be unable to play. On the other hand, you can tone it back and go for a slightly more moderate end board of things like Herald of the Arclight, Try Brigade Revolt, Ancient Warriors Double Dragon Lords, and of course Appaloosa with anywhere from 2 to 3 negates, which is definitely not as big of an end board, but is much more balanced and varied, especially in terms of the spread, and giving you that powerful Omni Negate and Floodgate effect from Herald of the Arclight, the latter of which is incredibly strong against a deck like Tyr, and because of the follow-up given to you by cards like Try Brigade Revolt, you are guaranteed almost every single time to be able to get that OTK on the following turn. Speaking of which, it's an incredible deck when it comes to accessing OTKs, with cards like Fractal giving you a free 1-card access code talker, and with having probably the second easiest access to Zeus in the entire game, going second or even turn 3 isn't going to be a problem for you whatsoever. If your tier limit matchup is still rough even with something like Herald of the Arclight on board, keep in mind that this deck has easy access to free DD Crows directly from the deck, with cards like Lyrillus Cobalt Sparrow and Lyrillus Recital Starling, allowing you to get any level 1 wing beast that you wish. So while that will actually make Bystials live against you, which they aren't otherwise, it is still amazing for stopping Tyr dead in their tracks. I'm not going to linger exactly on what the deck can do or how to play it for very long, considering that I actually have a full 2-hour-long breakdown of the bird up strategy, explaining my deck list, my ratio reasonings, and of course 10 or more combos plus pros and cons, and I worked very hard on it, so if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend that you go look at it. On the topic of this video though, the core for bird up won't even cost you $50, and while that doesn't include a card like Access Code Talker, it does include things like Utopic Draco Future and Divine Arsenal Zeus, which on his own is actually going for like $23 right now. He actually went up a lot. Bird Up is such a fantastic and fun deck that I promise will treat you very well as long as you give it the time of day to practice with it, and that combined with the price level is what's making it take number 3 on this list. In the number 2 spot on this list, we have Naturia. Specifically, I'm talking about Naturia Ishizu Vernasil. It's crazy to think how Naturia went from arguably one of the biggest laughingstocks in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, even though it has some really strong extra deck monsters, to being one of the arguably best decks you can play right now, and all it took is 3 cards out of Darkwing Blast. With 3 different engines powering your deck, with the Naturia cards giving you power, consistency, and recovery, the Vernasilfs giving you starting and extension, and the Ishizu cards giving you easy access to rank 4s, as well as recursion and the ability to screw with your opponent's graveyard, it really is just an absolute powerhouse of a strategy right now. You're essentially using the latter 2 engines in order to fuel your Naturia cards, which has plenty of 1-card combos between cards like Naturia Mole Cricket and Camellia, and gives you powerful end boards with cards like Naturia Sunflower. Naturia Sunflower is a really strong card, saying that you can quick effect negate an opponent's monster effect and destroy that monster by attributing itself and another Naturia monster. However, with Naturia Camellia's effect allowing you to replace the first cost with a mill 2 from the top of your deck instead, you can actually get 2 separate uses out of the Sunflower in one turn, while also dumping things like your Naturia Sacred Tree for consistency, and of course the Ishizu cards. The Naturia cards themselves are already super recursive, with Mole Cricket and Camellia getting either themselves or each other out of the grave respectively, but the Ishizu cards are what really ties it together in terms of the grind game, while also still being able to put your opponent through the ringer for their graveyard. Not only do your end boards consist of power cards like Naturia Sunflower, you can also make absurdly strong rank 4s, like of course Abyss Dweller right now, and cards like Naturia Beast, which were actually very hard to make in Naturia for the longest time, similar to Ice Barrier and their synchros, but can now be made off of just a single card, and that basically just locks down spells from your opponent for the entire game. The Vernasilf cards also allow you access to their boss monster on your end board, being Vera the Vernasilf Goddess, which is a quick effect monster reborn, a walking monster negate, and a permanent change of heart that also changes the monster you unearth so that you can use it to further your own plays. As always, not including staples, including cards like Castra Fenrir, which is really strong in the deck, and Baron de Fleur obviously, the entire core will probably, for all 3 engines, cost you around $40, and guess what? Only 5 of that roughly is the Naturia cards themselves. Even if you don't want to run the aforementioned engines for some odd reason, Naturia is such a small and compact engine that works pretty well on its own that you can splash it with just about any deck you feel like, with one of the most popular ones currently being Runic, which won't be brought up on this list exactly because it is still a pretty huge price tag. But disregarding that, for all of these reasons and more, I think that Naturia, Ishizu, Vernisylph, or just Naturia in general, deserves the number 2 spot on this list more than anything else. Before we get into my number 1 budget deck, I want to give a few honorable mentions to ones that didn't quite make the cut, but are still great options to at least pick up now. Plunder Patrol is probably one of the coolest archetypes to come out of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Utilizing your opponent's strategy to carefully calculate your own plays around it, while also being able to access almost every single summoning mechanic in the game, is absolutely amazing. Plunder Patrol, to my memory, I believe actually topped and or won around 2 regionals in the last couple of months, which really shows what the deck can do even now in such a dense format. Not to mention, they're absolutely dirt cheap, having gotten so many reprints out of both Ghosts from the Past 2 and the recent Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge set. The main reason I'm not including Plunder on this list though, is because the builds that have actually seen success lately are very fond of the Adventure engine, which admittedly did dip in price a little bit a few months ago, having been around $20 to $25 per copy of Right, but unfortunately it kind of just jumped back up, with Rights going for anywhere from $40 to $45 a copy. Damn, that's like 10 Plunder cores on their own. This isn't actually a reason to not pick up the cards now though while you still can, because come Photon Hypernova, Plunder Patrol is receiving Plunder Patrol Ship Yord, the fabled Earth attribute ship that Plunder Patrol players have been foaming at the mouth for years. And it did not disappoint with its wait time. Its ability to not only add any Plunder Patrol card from your deck to your hand when your opponent special summons a monster, as well as summon any Plunder Patrol from your deck for free if it's equipped with something at the same time in order to make a new ship and fuel it with a discard fodder, is already absolutely nuts, but the real kicker is the second effect. Adding any plunder from your graveyard to your hand, being any plunder card even, is already really strong, as well as placing it in the Pendulum Zone, but that's where you access the best effect of the card. See, you get to make a token of any attribute you feel like, and put one on each player's field, which not only gives you link material and makes cards like Rivalry of the Warlords very funny, but it essentially allows you to access any Plunder Patrol ship that you want on your very first turn, something that Plunder Patrol had always had massive issues with, because their best one Plunder Patrol ship lists had to be hard summoned more often than not, using a very mediocre spell. My favorite part about Yord though actually is none of that, but the fact that it's a completely generic level 8 synchro. And what engine makes really easy generic level 8 synchros? Well, that being Punk, of course, and it's honestly made the Punk build of Plunder Patrol my favorite build of the deck. I'm going to try to get my hands on the cards to make a deck profile for y'all, showcasing how just a single Plunder Patrol card and Emergency Teleport or Punk Xiamen can access you a really nice end board and so much card advantage in your hand that you wouldn't believe. But until then, Plunder Patrol is going to remain in the honorable mentions section of this list. My only other honorable mention is going to go to Dark World. So the newest Dark World support honestly raised several eyebrows in the community, because not only was it some of the most broken legacy support we've seen in a good while, but it was also all coming out in a structure deck. This made Dark World end up really affordable, while also giving them access to really strong cards such as Grapha, Dragon Overlord of Dark World, turning the deck into a very competent and even scary deck. The lack of hard ones per turn clauses on most of the cards in the archetype, including some of the newer cards, allows Dark World players to take very long turns, ending off on some really strong end boards with cards not only like Grapha, but also Hope Harbinger, Appaloosa, IP Masquerena, and of course powerful rank 4s like Abyss Dweller. It also allows them to be used in archetype cards such as Silva, Warlord of Dark World, which can potentially rip up to 4 cards from your opponent's hand back into their deck. Sounds really scary, right? Well, unfortunately, I think the deck still has a few problems that prevent me from placing it on this list. Namely, between cards like Dimension Shifter and all the Bystials, especially Bystial Baldrake coming out in Photon Hypernova, it has a really big issue when it comes to keeping their graveyard resources this format. As well, I've seen Dark World able to produce some really nasty hands that can end up making massive end boards, but I've also seen that because certain cards have to get discarded in order to give you any advantage, and the very large amount of high-level monsters in the deck, a lot of hands also end up just setting a monster and passing. This inconsistency on its own is making me a little bit iffy on Dark World despite the raw power that it's capable of. Not to mention the structure deck didn't even reprint some of the more pricier dangers in a deck where danger optimization is really important in order to get its plays going, with Nessies still being $10 and even common Chupacabras from a different structure deck being around 5 apiece. Speaking of, the dangers also provide an extra layer of RNG to the deck in both the hand roulette of part of the effect as well as the draw power, so even if you have a bunch of different dangers, you could end up just drawing into nothing and then just having a few bodies on board. These complaints may seem a little bit picky, but personally I just don't believe it is currently Dark World's time to shine in the spotlight. However, I do think it is a deck that has some pretty serious potential in the future. One more thing before we get to the final pick though, if you have enjoyed the video so far, please be sure to leave a like on it, as it really helps show me that you guys are actually like these types of high effort videos. Not to mention, it helps push it into the algorithm more than anything else. And if you really enjoy this kind of content and you do want to see more, as well as some other awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content on the channel, then you should totally subscribe because it supports the channel more than anything else and it's absolutely free. But without further ado, let's go ahead to the last pick of the video. And my number one competitive budget deck for the January 2023 format is Floowandereeze. That's right, Floowandereeze. It's pretty interesting to see that the third best deck arguably right now is on the best part of a budget tier list. No matter what your opinion may be on Flunder, you have to admit that it has rightfully earned its place among the top decks by being a really strong anti-meta pick for the top deck of its time, this time being Tearlament. Cards like Dimension Shifter and other such cards that move things to the banish zone are actually really good in the deck, as well as being an advantage gainer by allowing them to add them back later while completely crippling the opponent. The ability to summon Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds, especially on your opponent's turn, is enough to stick a wrench in the gears of many different top decks right now, and you can easily protect it with cards like Rise of the Mega Monarch, which is also returning other things to the field and the top of the deck, allowing you to stack your opponent's deck so you can make sure they don't draw into cards that they may need later. And then of course there's the In Archetype Empin, which is basically a walking hydrogen bomb towards any deck that uses link monsters, while also being able to protect itself and further your advantage during your combo. The deck does have some consistency issues in that while it does have some really strong 1 to 1.5 card combos, it's completely dead in the water, or I guess the air because they are birds, if you don't end up seeing them. However, they can easily supplement this by being able to play 3 copies of cards like Pot of Duality, Extrav, and Prosperity, allowing them to dig for those 1-card starters as well as those powerful Floodgate cards. Speaking of, can we sit for one moment and think about how someone at Konami decided this was not only a good idea to come up with, but also print? Yeah, one of the main things that did hold Flunder back from being a super budget deck as opposed to some other budget decks was the price of its quick play spell Advent of Adventure that used to run you around $25 to $30 a copy, but has since strangely dipped to around $13 to $15 a copy, meaning that with the rest of the deck costing pennies, you can easily build it for around $50. Flunder is an amazing competitive deck that is super easy for players that want to pick up a competitive deck for an affordable price and roll with the punches of Tearlaments with ease. And because of this, it's going to take the #1 slot as my competitive budget deck for the format. But with that out of the way, that's going to have to do it for my competitive budget deck list. Be sure to let me know in the comments if there are current budget decks that you're playing or looking into playing, or any that you feel like I may have missed in either the main list or the honorable mentions. I'm always happy to hear more options, because remember, this is my personal opinion, but everyone has their own. And again, tell me what you thought about the video in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please be sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into each recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my list series, which I have neatly organized into a playlist, then perhaps consider subscribing, because again, it supports the channel more than anything else, and it is absolutely free. It will cost you nothing to support the channel directly. Maybe this list won't hold up as well come Photon Hypernova format, but we can always just find that out later, and I hope that you all are as excited to play in that format as I am, because even though Castra is definitely a bit daunting to look at, it is still going to shake up the meta a lot by being a really strong counter to Tearlament, even if Tear is going to end up using the cards themselves. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.